Hello, good day. So this video will be anchored or will talk about linguistic and literacy development of children and adolescents. So linguistics stems from all works of nature. Nature is spellbindingly wild yet pleasantly predictable, seemingly repetitive yet subtly evolving. Neither living at home nor simply taking classes was the magical recipe for becoming fluent, but rather an approximate mixture of the two was necessary. Truly, what I learned as a student still continues to inform my way of teaching and understanding of language acquisition today. Language education should also create the proper conditions for learners to build a linguistic basis of the target language and equip them with the skills to transfer knowledge to the real world. Language as a whole is greater than its parts due to the importance of context and that it requires social construction and probabilistic cognition to describe its dynamic nature. Additionally, there's an importance of subjectivity to show that learners go through continual identity construction. So I interweave my critical view of the notion of standard English in reaction to globalization that fiercely continues to influence the present and future cultures and their native languages, including varieties of non-standard English. As such, educators should embrace the reality that English is a global language and the intersection of linguistic behaviors among speakers of different varieties is inevitable. According to Kanagara, 2007 writes, English is not an object or system that gets used in different places, but rather something that emerges from local practices. Lingua franca English is not a product located in the mind of the speaker. It is a social process constantly reconstructed in sensitivity to environmental factors. Moreover, utterances are inherently ambiguous without careful consideration of the context. As Ellis 2007 explains, a major characteristic of the environments that are relevant to human cognition is that they are fundamentally probabilistic. Every stimulus is ambiguous, as is any utterance or piece of language. In order to understand the interplay of form, meaning, and use, language users operate on their lifetime analysis of the distributional characteristics of the language input, using a statistical ensemble of language experiences that changes slightly every time a new utterance is processed. So in other words, speakers must apply their life experience to create situated meaning defined by G 2005 as the particular language that forms take on a specific context. So language then is the speaker's or author's attempt to be understood or misunderstood based on his or her knowledge of the context, which G defines as the material setting, the people present, the language that comes before and after a given utterance, the social relationships of the people involved, and their ethnic, gendered, and sexual identities, as well as cultural, historical, and institutional factors. How ambiguity becomes meaning in the work of interpreting language in context. Departing from Larson Freeman's model 2003, meaning can also be described as used in other frameworks, that so and so might as a first shot be equated with some statement or disjunction of statement about what people intend to effect by. So the maxim of quantity requires speakers to be informative. The maxim of quality states that users must be honest. The maxim of relation states that speakers make relevant contributions. Maxim of manner describes how users avoid obscurity and ambiguity. Through conversational inference, defined by Gompers as the means of which participants in a conversation assess others. That's true. Assess others' intentions, and on which they base their responses. Assertion that every utterance is ambiguous holds the key in recovering the intended meaning through implicature was the context. So identity and society add an additional layer to language. As Williams writes, a definition of language is always implicity or explicity, a definition of human beings in the world. A part of the portfolio assessment is voice. In its parts and as a whole, the portfolio must be such that, whether the writing is introspective or academic in register, it could only have been written by the particular author. So this expectation nicely reflects that individuals have idiolects, which is defined by the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy that as language, exhaustively in terms of intrinsic properties of some single person, in which the main force of intrinsic is to exclude essential reference to features of the person's wider linguistic community, and perhaps too of their physical environment. Therefore, idiolects are the stylizations and representations of me that separate me from, but also situate me in my environment. As such, I depend on my environment to discover meaning in order to create my own meaning, whether or not I transmit it to the world or hold it internally. The environments where I use language may be serious, playful, conscious, subconscious, or fictional in nature. Ultimately, I not only create meaning but also express and create my identity through language. I have a voice. So, drawing the Whedon's 1997 post-structural feminist theory stated that identity is both constructed in an interaction and that subjectivity is precarious, contradictory, and in process, constantly being reconstituted and discourse each time we think or speak. Applying this treatment of subjectivity to language learners Norton explains that when language learners speak, they are not only exchanging information with target language speakers, but they are constantly organizing and reorganizing a sense of who they are and how they relate to the social world. Important then is not only the individual use of language, but also the interaction with others in order to create identity. The individual learner is not acting in isolation. She is affecting and being affected by the environment. It is an important aspect of language use includes the participation metaphor, explained as a process that involves developing the ability to communicate through the language and behavior that are deemed acceptable by the community. By Swain and Dethers, 2007. As Winger explains, we not only produce our identities through the practice we engage in, but we also define ourselves through practices we do not engage in. Thus far, my treatment of language has included the components, context, individual use, and social use of language. Now, it should be considered how language changes. Every time user speaks, they contribute to the evolution of language. As Larson Freeman 2006 writes, language is not fixed, but is rather a dynamic system. Language evolves and changes in the dynamics of language used between and among individuals. Engaging students in an authentic text designed for a target language audience necessitates finding ways to expand their language abilities to those of a target language audience. However, such a rich environment necessitates proper pedagogical tools for learning to take place. So a learner uses a more knowledgeable other or MKO, to navigate through their zone of proximal development. ZPD, defined as the distance between the actual development level as determined by independent problem solving and level of potential development as determined through problem solving under adult guidance or in collaboration with more capable peers. So Donato asserts that co-knowledge and co-construction result in linguistic change among within individuals during joint activity. Scaffolding may be achieved with others or through self-access and resourcefulness. And what ultimately remains important is the learner's ability to use resources to work within their ZPDs. When learners directly engage with themselves in the learning process, it is believed that promoting learner autonomy, that is, helping learners take responsibility for their learning and to bring about necessary changes in them, so it can be achieved. So one form of becoming a self-access resource may be technologically based. So no matter the level of language learner, there may always be a sensation of there is more to learn. So the noticing hypothesis accounts for the process of learners paying attention to and noticing input from the target language. So when learners notice a specific feature of the input, they are made explicitly aware of structure or rule. Thus, this noticing helps them make progress in their use of language, both in terms of grammatical use and social use. So Ellis, 1997, argues that input enhancement is a facet of explicit learning to help learners notice the gap between their output and the actual input, thus enhancing their accuracy and fluency through use. So the literary devices used in the text, simile, personification, and hyperbole, are actually quite common in everyday English and are part of pragmatic competence. Achieving pragmatic competence helps students in their social lives because to become versatile speakers capable of expressing meaning through different linguistic forms. So the authentic text feature language as a whole greater than its parts, and the lesson include activities that require social construction and the technological tools to decode the content. So in order to guide learners through their ZPD, or known as zone of proximal development, students focus on forms, predict and assess preposition use, and take their learning beyond the classroom. The overarching themes of what is language and what is language learning and teaching are emphasized through description of cognitive and socio-cultural frameworks, which bring the individual into social play with their environment in the classroom, and to make sure to include assessment because it helps learners to connect their use of language, whether or not in the classroom, to the language they witness in the world. So to enliven my role as a future teacher, perhaps my approach to lesson planning and teaching in general best align itself with Van Laer's 2008 assertion that pedagogical activities should require the involvement of mind, body, and emotions and a persistent attitude of social engagement and environmental exploration. In Van Leer, 1996, he also suggests that keeping a balance between lesson planning and improvisation. In the spirit of humor and creativity in the classroom, I value the importance of improvisation in lesson planning. While the lesson is framed around 2 hours, I still aim to allow the environment to trigger new learning and teaching opportunities in order to strike balance. So for me, this video presentation is an assessment like this create momentum and allow students to personally witness their success. So that would be all. Thank you.